Hello, Cardstack community. My name is Chrissy, the founding director of the Cardstack project, coming to you from the land of the Web3. Today, I'm joined by Dfns founder Clarisse Hagège, who is going to talk to you about Web3 wallet infrastructure. As you know, Web3 is a very broad field that is not just about one blockchain. There's multiple blockchain of people coming together, thinking about decentralization in a way that provides self-custody, self-ownership, but also the expression of coordination activity. Between the public and the private is really where there's a lot of gap right now about the solutions and people figuring out what they own, what they control, trusting an exchange versus trusting themselves. And there's a lot of opportunity to do that better. One of the things to do that people are working on is this multi-party computation approach where wallets are split apart into keys and then kind of putting the keys together like a magical little emblem where you can have magic happen when we put it together. So I would like to talk to Clarisse a little bit about that project, but in starting with kind of like what brought you, Clarisse, to this world of working on this idea of unlocking via keys the Web3 possibility for people.
Of course, thank you very much for having me, Chris. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast today. So I actually kind of stumbled in 2016, or I would say I was red-pilled really in 2016 when one of my friends came to me and say, Clarisse, you should read IOTA white paper. And I was like, all right, I'm not technical. What am I going to do with that? I was like, okay, just read it. And there, you go for it. And like a lot of people, my mind exploded. And I was like, okay, so I totally understand what it's about. And so what's the emergence of new blockchain, not just having Bitcoin and Ethereum, but really what was at stake, right, with the different developments there. And then I'm a former banker. I actually spent 10 years in banking. And so at that point, my friend wanted to build a remittance app. So the idea was to enable US citizens to send money back to their countries, right? And to be able to really facilitate remittance, make it cost efficient, make it faster. And so we worked on that for a year, but in 2016, the state of the technology was not what it is today. It was hard to actually build on blockchain.
Anything.
Really hard. Exactly. Very different time. Really, the progress we've done in the past 6-7 years are incredible. And so anyway, this project died out a bit like that. But that's really when I was convinced that, blockchain was revolutionizing not just the way we view, money, not just also, it was not just a tool to, for instance, improve some of the process already in place in the banking area, but how fundamentally it will change any sort of value transfer and how we will envision going forward the idea of owning and how transferring ownership from one individual to another. And so 3 years later, I was given the opportunity to actually consult for a startup that was incubated by the bank I was working for. It was a blockchain name service on Cosmos, very interesting subject as well, very also infrastructure subject. And at the time, they were finalizing their private ICO. Something that I thought that was interesting in 2019 was to go and pitch investors that had never bought crypto before. So family offices, small asset managers, small investors. And so selling them the project was not very complicated because once again, blockchain name service is kind of a no-brainer when you know how to talk about it, right? But selling them the closing of the investment was a nightmare. I was always confronted to people who would tell me, all right, so what will I do with this private key? So I would say, okay, just buy an HSM, buy a nano ledger, buy something like that and just handle it. And so I would have very interesting feedback, which were more around, okay, but we have compliance systems internally. I cannot just, give a nano ledger to one of my traders. What happened if he leaves the firm? And so this is really when, in order to be efficient in my sales and the SEO, I started diving down into what was institutional custody in 2019. So at the time, you had pretty much, self-custodial through HSM, or you had to trust or to entrust the biggest custodian of this world, so the BitGo, the Anchorage. But the entry door was very high. With a 50K investment, you would not, go and open a
unless you already have a infrastructure and you're doing a lot of investment in multiple projects. It's unlikely to meet the threshold for that custodial institutional kind of onboarding.
Absolutely. As a new
On the
investor,
crypto side, on the crypto
on the
side, yeah.
exactly on the crypto side, as a new investor, it made just no sense, and frankly, it was also very expensive. And at the time, in 2019, what was Curve and Fireblocks were very early project. They were pretty much at their seed level, iterating on the first version of their product. And something that caught my eye was MPC, a multi-party computation technology, for many reasons. I think the first one was that I could not really wrap my head around the fact that we would all operate on decentralized technology, yet take our private key, put it in centralized device with centralized third parties. To me, it rang like, okay, ticking bomb, the next crisis is coming. So that was something that to me was made no sense. And for the first time, MPC technology could actually I could envision with MPC technology a way to actually decentralize the safekeeping of your private key, of your assets.
Right, and MPC stands for multi-party computation, which is the underlying mathematics to take, using that multi-party computation to take a key and split into different key shares. Is that the type of MPC you're talking about?
Absolutely, yes. And if you want, we can dive down a bit more on that. But just to cut on how I got there, just to finish this story, the long story short is that, you know, to me it was so important, and there was a lack of a solution on which people could build, because I thought in 2019 was convinced that we would move from an economy of investor creators to actually an economy of builders, and there were no tools to build on, and you cannot just, you know, build an application if you don't have a way to welcome your users, right? And to me, the non-custodial method had its limits, right? And so this is really where I think those two items were the reason why I decided to actually quit my job and start working on defense full time. But to come back to your point about MPC, multi-party computation, it's actually it's what we call a cryptographic primitive. Contrary to what people think, MPC is not new, right? It's not technology that just arrived in the past 5-6 years. It's been around for nearly 30 years. The founding fathers of MPC were in the 1990s, really. So MPC has been around for quite a while, but adapting it to digital asset security, I think one of the first firms that actually launched or had this idea was Unbound, right? Who was sold 2 years ago, I think, to Coinbase now, which was pretty much co-founded by the two amazing cryptographers, Yehuda Lindell and Nigel Smart. And so from there, the idea of using MPC. So the beauty about MPC, and I'm going to try to stay at a high level, but yet to really understand what's behind, is that during the process of generating the private key and during the process of signing a transaction, the private key is never reassembled. So at the beginning, when it's generated, it's in shares. And when you want to sign a transaction, actually, you know, there's no magic, right? It's actually mathematics, and there's also, you know, ZK components. There's a lot of components within the MPC algorithm, but pretty much you will just need to show the proof that you have those shares and not actually reassemble the shares itself. And that makes it a technology that removes the single point of failure. And I think that's what's pretty much, you know, very impressive about MPC, and that's why, in my opinion, it is the future of digital asset security.
It's really interesting that you're coming in from the kind of more institutional finance angle, because MPC is really the only way to work, because you really do not want to assemble the private key that controls the empire of either your own assets, or worse yet, all your client's asset. That would be really bad, right? It's important for people to be able to act on behalf, but never be able to become owners, because you can become owners of any account on Ethereum just having 12 words. Right? Like effective owners, and you have to trust the person to do not look at those 12 words as like, that's worth, you know, $100 million or more. Let me do nothing with it. And I mean, you can trust that, and a lot of people do that, but that just seems to be against it. So it's really nice that this idea of not having that private key be reassembled, but only requiring that consensus. One question I have is that when you split a key into multiple bits, you still have to entrust 3 people, 5 people, to be the signers when you need them to come to your not your aid, but to your service to do that. Who are these people who are signing when those keys are distributed and a transaction, let's say a trade or a transfer has to happen from, let's say, the client side, the person who is in control of the asset legally? Who are these signers? Are they the client themselves, their staff, or is it some third-party provider?
It's a very good question. So you can pretty much implement MPC and implement and distribute the signers the way you want, right? It's a technology that is very modular. When you look at most of the technological service providers out there that are managing MPC, they do a co-custodial model, which is the provider will keep few shares, 1-2 shares, and they will give some to the clients, right? And so in that way, the client doesn't have as the key share that is necessary to actually initiate the transaction, but it doesn't have the whole burden, meaning that if they were to lose that key share, right, it can be regenerated. So you remove that point of failure. So that's kind of the broadest, I would say, MPC implementation scheme. Now, we chose a different route, for instance, at Dfns. Our vision, and because we're also addressing that mid-market and addressing, the startups that are coming to this market, which sometimes are people that have good ideas and need blockchain to have their use cases being efficient, but they are not necessarily Web3 people, right? And so our vision is that these people don't even want to have to manage one key share. Managing one key share is already a nightmare, because when you look at this, the other providers, if you were to lose your key share, yes, you can regenerate it, but it will induce a huge disruption in your business, right? Sometimes you need a KYC to be able to regenerate that key share. It's not seamless, right? It's still a process. And so what we do at Dfns is that we've implemented that MPC implementation in a decentralized peer-to-peer network. Why? Because we want to achieve two things, really. One, high level security, but also business continuity. So this way, we are entrusting signers that are neutral providers. So, tier 4 data centers, cloud providers, which have one function, which is operating what we call the DKG, the distributed key generation, and the signing. And therefore, what we're doing is that we're taking the private key and completely abstract the complexity of managing that private key and saying, hey, user, what's going to be important is the way you authenticate to your API, which is very traditional, right? It's what you do already in the Web2 way, right? But
you sign into Google and it checks whether you are from a familiar computer. Do you have a cookie? Are you from a geolocation or IP range that's high risk or low risk or expected, right? So the kind of more traditional Web2 authentication, detection, and fraud detection, I would say, rules, right?
Absolutely. So something that is much more understandable, much easier to secure, and I would say a context that is very familiar with our audience. And in MPC, something that we didn't discuss is that there's several ways to sign a transaction with multi-party computation, but the one that is used mostly in digital asset security is threshold signing, right? And what's amazing with threshold signing is that you can determine a threshold of shares that you need to perform the transaction. And if you were to lose the other shares, right, then it's okay. You can still perform that signature. So let's say, we were to generate a private key in 5 shares and you set up a threshold of 3. Should you lose 2 shares, it's fine. You still can operate, right? And so in our model, no signers, no party has the threshold necessary of shares to perform that transaction. Therefore, no one owns the private key. So the ownership is left at the user level, which is exactly what we wanted to do, because Dfns is not a custodian, is not a qualified custodian. We're also a technological service provider, and we want to leave our clients in total control. So make it easy for them to manage private key while leaving them in control. And I think that's what we've been obsessed for the past 2.5 years.
That's really an interesting model of combining not only the peer-to-peer model for the execution of like the smart contract and the staking and the validation, but actually treating the wallet kind of regime as possibly a network of people who are providing that signature service using other models. Before we get a little bit deeper, there's some interesting kind of question I have in that. I want to talk a little bit about the use cases that you were able to, now that you have this kind of API for developer to integrate with and a set of service provider that provide that kind of a trustless trust service to provide that kind of leveraging and operating the MPC promise in a practical way. What are some of the kind of like industry use case that this infrastructure now supports? You mentioned about startups, so they have some good ideas and they may need a wallet infrastructure. You also mentioned earlier that you encounter this problem by talking to people who are in the family office and investment. Are you seeing both of those use cases emerging simultaneously, or are there other use cases that this infrastructure as it's being built today can address these needs, the gaps that's in the space right now?
Of course. And that's when I think for us, the importance of building a product that enables developers to, build their platform on top of us was super important. And so we positioned Dfns very, very early on as a developer tool. So we're API first. Why am I starting with that? Is when you API first, you don't pretty much advocate for your UI, right? You sell your API, so you sell to builders. So today, the VC, the small asset managers and small hedge funds are not our direct clients, because these people need a UI to interact with, or sometimes they even need qualified custody to operate, right?
Yeah, for regulatory reasons. Yeah,
absolutely. And so where we are different from most of the MPC player out there is we're making this technology available to people building, so to developers. And so the use case that we have today, we have about 70% use case that are mainly on crypto, and there you will have exchanges that need to embed within their infra, a wallet infrastructure, whether it is to operate on their own, so centrally through Omnibus, a centralized exchange, or whether it is to actually enable their user to actually access their exchange in a self-custodial way. So we have a lot of those. So we will have exchanges, we have OTC brokers, we have treasury management platforms, we have staking dApps, so we have a tokenization platform. So we will have, a wide range of pretty much people providing UI to address a specific use case that want to ease the onboarding of their users, so make it easy for their users to onboard within their platform while maintaining self-custodianship of their wallets. So that's, I would say, most of the use case on the crypto side. Why? Because we are, first and foremost a cybersecurity company, so our security is really institutional grade. And then after, we also actually address the NFT market. I would say for 30% today of our client base is on the NFT side. And there we're mostly, the people that are using our APIs are mostly NFT marketplaces, NFT infrastructure solutions. So once again, builders and I would say not even directly the end platform, but people building solution to make it easy for NFT entrepreneurs to develop their solution.
I see. So the infrastructure, once you have the once someone needs the MPC capability and they have an idea of how they want to do it, it could be a direct customer if they're an exchange and a facing customer, or it could be a service provider to make NFT kind of like projects, do minting and stuff like that. But then they get to have that kind of a wallet infrastructure in there. Yeah. That's really, really cool. And I think what's really missing in the discussions we have, especially in the Ethereum spaces, there's a little bit lack of awareness of MPC as a technology. There's been a lot of discussion about account abstraction, which is just using smart contract, the one hammer that the Ethereum developer have, and say, let's do it through that. I think there's some logic that is really valuable to be done in the smart contract wallet, but a smart contract wallet still has owners still has keys, and you go back to the situation is who has control of those keys.
Thank you very much for saying that, because sometimes we hear, and so I think account abstraction is amazing and it will solve a lot of issues for many builders. But first, obviously, it doesn't work for all blockchains, right? As you were saying, it's really pretty much Ethereum EVM based, right? And second, it's just it pushed the problem back to
Yeah.
who's going to operate that smart contract, right? And it makes it even more important to secure your key of that smart contract, because then otherwise you put the money at risk of your millions of users that will be provided accounts through account abstraction. So actually, sometimes people think it is, account abstraction versus MPC. It's not a versus MPC. It's
an
both.
and,
It's combined.
Yeah.
And I think combined, it can be very powerful. Very powerful, and that's obviously we have we have a long roadmap ahead of us, but we really want to address the integration of account abstraction with it MPC, and making easy for developer to have pre-templated smart contract that enable them to address this use case while managing their master private key in a very safe way using MPC. So absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think one of the really interesting kind of use cases thinking about account abstraction that's uniquely capable when you're on a platform, let's say Ethereum compatible blockchain, which you have listed a lot of them on your website, it's integration you've done, is for automation. Like one of the nice things about it is that you can say this smart contract can automate this action when certain things happen. But the revocation of that right, the delegation still has to be done with some sort of key signing, and that's when you need either your own key, software wallet, hopefully hardware wallet, and possibly MP3, MPC. One use case that is really interesting to me is to as I was thinking about account abstraction, I actually gave a talk in ETH Dubai on hybrid custody. It was mostly coming from the account abstraction, kind of like smart contract wallet, knows to save type of angle. But one use case I kind of identify is this idea of recovery. So it's like, can there be a key that can do a recovery? And it would be very interesting to have a key that can reprint the other owner or reset the owner, but that actually is an MPC threshold stuff. You have to log in 10 times out of 17 to prove that you're yourself. And then they just can do one thing, which is recover the key. And they don't know that they're participating. Maybe there's a little bit more opacity about who, so they can't collude. So I feel like at least MPC as an account recovery mechanism for account abstraction could be a really nice introduction of how they work together. So that was one of the things I kind of represented.
Yeah, I totally agree, and to me, once again, it needs to be combined, and because otherwise, I'm kind of worried about builders that don't think about that point first, right? Because once again, the automation is very appealing. The idea of enabling your users to manage their accounts without having to manage the trades is obviously very appealing. But if you don't do things properly, and if you don't, as you were saying, think about the recovery, think about the security of your smart contract, then once again, this is a bigger ticking bomb as well going forward. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think there's a push right now, especially with more kind of like attention to consumer-facing crypto or Web3 application, is to make it easier and easier to onboard user. There's a huge push, and that's coming from the founders themselves. As more product founder comes in the marketplace, they are frustrated, but also encouraged by the fact that they can make even easier on-ramp for users. And they have looked at other locations. Why don't we just give them like simpler hosted wallet to get started, kind of reducing that friction? And one of those technology is like a magic link type of stuff, which is just like send an email and I'll give you that. You guys have done some kind of research on this area. Can you tell us a little bit about like your research in the magic link and whether that's a good solution to get people on board, or that introduces a security, that vulnerability? Are there things that we need to be concerned about when we even lower the barrier of entry of crypto, like first day of using crypto?
Yes, as we started addressing more and more B2C use cases, we had a lot of funders, a lot of CTOs coming to us saying, "How can I make it easier even for our clients
even
to
easier,
actually,
yeah, mm-hmm.
Exactly, even easier to access their wallets, right?" And so one of because magic links has been used in the industry, especially this was kind of launched during the NFT crave, right?
Yes.
And so how do you enable people to get quick access, right, to their NFTs? vulnerabilities. We looked into it, and our CISO looked into it. And so by doing the due diligence, we actually realized that, there's actually a major vulnerability to Magic Links itself. And it goes beyond Web3, right? It's not specific to Web3. It's pretty much everywhere. But there's a reason why your bank in Web2 world doesn't give you access to their environment using Magic Link. It's because it is, once again, what we discovered a major vulnerability that enabled us to completely take over all the wallets that were secured by Magic Link. And this is a very scary thing to do. Today, we estimate that there's about 30 million users that are accessing their wallets through Magic Link. So what we did then was actually to help the teams that were using Magic Link, so the magic of this world, the Web3 of the sequence. We helped these guys fix their vulnerability by introducing what we call an OTP. So the idea was to enforce 2FA. It is, it did degrade the user experience because you had another step, right? But anyway, security is not magic, right? And so this is why when we associate, even sometimes, and I hear that a lot, MPC magically reassembles the key. It doesn't magically, and so when there's a shortcut, usually there's an issue, and so we filed CVEs to pretty much show our findings, but we're super happy that most of the people we contacted really very quickly patched this vulnerability, and I think that in the meantime, at least we prevented hackers from abusing these wallets. And so at the end of the day, I think when you're in Web3, and especially with what happens over the past 12 years, I mean, people lost billions of assets because they mismanaged their private keys, because because there were exploits, because they got hacked. I think we all have a responsibility when you're building in this industry to make sure that you protect people, because a hit with one company is a hit on the whole industry. And
Absolutely.
I think we've seen that too painfully the past 6 months, right? And so we take it very seriously at Dfns to make sure that people know what they're getting into. And so we refused to put Magic Links in our authentication system. We actually we were super happy, and we'll be announcing very soon that we're leveraging WebOffen, which is an open source protocol, to actually make it extremely easy for people to interact with their wallets, right? While not leaving them in this sort of half-baked security, half-baked UX, but really making sure that we leverage on both sides.
It makes a lot of sense to leverage things like WebAuthn because, to the degree that Apple doesn't allow you to put the key generation in the enclave, the best you can do is to use an Apple-provided API like Passkey. So the question is, how do you bridge what Apple gives you, which is Passkey? Yeah. It's better than nothing. It's actually better than most, right? Better than a password, for example. Yeah. But you have to find a way to bridge. And it seems like you guys, because you have this Web2, Web3 bridge by way of this kind of like service provider network peer-to-peer, you could find a way to bring them together, right?
Absolutely, and once again, more details will be announced very shortly. We're beta testing with our current customer our new implementation, but it's exactly how you described it, and you nailed it, which is on our side, the point of failure is the authentication to the API, and that can be done via WebOffen. And so when you combine both, you have a solution that is extremely powerful, right? Because you no longer, the private key is decentralized across the world within different providers, different security enclave. So it becomes nearly impossible. Nothing is impossible in security, but extremely complicated to actually hack this material, while making sure that on the authentication side, we'll leverage, cutting edge technology like WebOffen to secure that authentication level. And I think that's the implementation that enables us to then reach that UX that we need if we want to if we want to reach blockchain mass adoption, even though I really don't think that it's an infra issue, right? Infra needs to level up to enhance blockchain mass adoption. I think we still need more use cases, right?
More use cases, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think it would be wrong to blame it only on the infra solutions. We need also use cases, but you need both, right? If you don't have both, you can't. We can't. We won't add a lot of users within the next years.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the use case side is a lot of use case people think about what we use social media and publishing for using blockchain. Well, that's still a wallet problem. You still have to get everyone in a wallet. And when we looked at how people, when they were trying to have that exodus moment with Twitter a few months ago, it was really hard to get people to onboard the decentralized social networks. Right? Not only the mastodon of the world with its own problems of following people on different servers, but also just getting everybody a key on the network and tokens to be able to pay and mint, and some of them are fronting, some social networks are fronting the gas. So there's a lot of problems to solve, but key is definitely one of them. But one thing, in my personal opinion, is that I think if we can solve consumer private key ownership and usage, it does unlock more use cases than just crypto and blockchain asset. Decentralized communications are all built on top of that. So I think there's a lot of decentralized web use cases that can actually build on the infrastructure of decentralized key that is introduced by Web3 and crypto, but actually becomes the common substrate. Because once you have a private key and people manage them and they can recover them like other basic infrastructure, then you start questioning, do I really need all these Web2 provider to be trusted custodian essentially? And you realize, well, maybe you just go to the side and just help recover, once in a while, and that make them a less primary in their kind of user activity stream. They're useful, but not in the center, capturing the value between the provider and the service provider. So it could happen that way.
I couldn't agree more. I actually, we've done a bit of research as well, because at the end of the day, you always get a lot of you don't just get wiser, but you get a lot of lessons from history, right? And when you look at the history of custody, right, and actually when you take it back to thousands of centuries ago, it started with the Sumerian. Pretty much the history of custody of any sort of assets is the history of making sure that people have been trying to, or it's the continuous failure of people trying to appoint third parties, and those third parties failing to do their job. Whether they were notaries, whether they were sometimes governments, whether they were appointing qualified custodians by regulator. Why? I mean, there's a lot of reasons, right? But pretty much because there's when you put all this power in the hands of few people, well, people will tend to not use it for the general good. But this continuous history of failed third party to custody people's assets can be mitigated. It can be mitigated if technology enable recovery of your private key, if technology is decentralized, while making sure that people need to operate together to actually unlock this security and not just have one party. And so this is why I think you, once again, completely aligned with what you just said. And that's really what's behind the vision of Dfns, making sure that even one day Dfns disappear. So we have global network of third parties. None of them individually can do anything with people's assets, but they are incentivized to collaborate to be able to make sure that you have ultimate business continuity and people can interact with their assets in without depending on, once again, any third party. I think that's the ideal, trustless or trust optimized setup. Yes. But we're still, there's still a long way to go before we get there. But I think there's we have I would say seen a path where little by little, by making sure that we remove trusted or we remove single point of trust within our infrastructure. Little by little, we want to achieve that model.
Yeah, it's really great. And any technology solution, Steve Jobs famously said, is in the intersection of technology and humanities, right? And I think the technological progress we can see, the getting multi-party computation, not only in the key management. I know people and projects I've interviewed working on actually doing homeomorphic kind of computation to actually do something with the keys, using the same provider, the same participants, and kind of do more with that. But the humanity humanities style, absolutely. What you just described is the history of the humanities. People study this, right? And that is really about history, about repeating itself. And I think this idea of like democracy, or just idea of just splitting the power into more and splitting a key into more keys, is in the general spirit of that type of system, like the democratic system, where it's the worst system in the world except for everything else. So, we split the control up. It's likely that you can trust the body more, and obviously they can collude. And when they collude, hopefully you can get rid of them. This leads me to one kind of interesting technical question. As my understanding of multi-party computation is evolved over the time, but my understanding, there was some earlier question about, is the key ever available? Is there any sort of toxic way? So I think that's been kind of removed. But this idea of being able to reshard the key. So like, I don't trust my current provider. How does that work? And what is the current state of it? And how have you guys implemented it so that I can elect, let's say, a different body of validators, or as my need grows, instead of having 3 or 5, I may want to have 13 of 20, 1 or something like that, because my asset in that particular account or that address has grown. What is the mechanism for evolving the population of signers?
Yeah. So you have several properties with MPC, right? You have key repair, you have key refresh, and what you're referring to is the ability to refresh pretty much your private key, right? And I think what's interesting there and very unique about MPC is that it is not as easy as the word key refresh means, right? But it is possible with MPC algorithms to pretty much, let's say you have 3 out of 5 shares, right? And you would want to refresh 2-3 shares because you think they've been compromised, because you think you have the intuition that maybe one of the signers, once again, have been compromised. Well, you can do that without modifying the address of the wallet. And I think that's what's super powerful about MPC, because in the multi-sig setup, if that happens, right, you need to regenerate new private keys, and you will have to regenerate completely new addresses. So it completely disrupts businesses. With MPC, that's not how it works, right? Now, there's the notion of epoch associated with MPC, meaning that once you refresh, the key shares that belong to the old epoch are can no longer be used to reconstruct or to sign a transaction, to perform signature, pretty much. So you have the notion of your set of key shares belonging to certain epochs and making them available for signing, which is great, right? Otherwise, it means that those key shares that you've regenerated, if someone were to actually find them, they could perform a transaction. No, that's not how it works. So it's a very strong property, which enable us to pretty much tell our customers. So we don't do that, and actually, it's people advertise it, but no one does it on a perpetual basis. So we don't refresh the key shares of our clients every 5 minutes or every hour, right? For many reasons, but mostly because if you want them to be available right away in terms of memory, in terms of cost, it would be very expensive. But we do that as a security measure. If we have one alert
when you need it,
exactly, that one signer has been compromised, then we immediately operate key refresh on our clients, and so this is something on our clients' website, and this is something that can also be initiated by our clients directly.
That's really cool, because one of the weirdest thing about public key and private key is that the symmetry that is beautiful in the mathematics does not match the asymmetry of how addresses, especially when people have Ethereum addresses that is part of their Twitter name, or the first 4 digit is like kind of their brand, or they have ENS that points to them, or whatever it might be. They are kind of like credibility, right? People have built up in addresses knowledge and credibility and trust. And then that address is directly tied to the key phrases, because it's just two sides of the same coin, right? The key pair. And that stuff can compromise the moment someone screenshot you security footage when you accidentally show the key on your phone or MetaMask, or can copy and paste it into the wrong place. You should never copy and paste it, but how do people know it's 12 words? How can you not take screenshot? Everything is screenshotted. I screenshot my boarding pass, right? So So this idea of being able to change the underlying key, sharded or not, it could be one of one, and having to be independent of the public reputational key or address is such a important thing. But the cryptography is so against that human nature that I think this idea of key refresh is a really important primitive. That I think even that alone is a reason why you should never use a naked key.
I totally agree. And just to build on what you were saying, because recently we've seen some vulnerabilities being addressed on MPC. We've inserted several MPC lib, right? And so what's interesting about that, right? And I think the point we want to make is that it is a complex technology. It is extremely powerful, but it is a complex technology. And I'm actually board member of the MPC Alliance, and we've started the effort at the MPC Alliance to work on standardization. So there's a parallel effort with NIST going on threshold cryptography. Right. And it's super important. So the comments were up early April. It's going to be a long process, but it's very important that NIST start looking into it. But at the MPC level, in parallel, we want to make sure that we release this year implementation standard to start working with the major standards out there to frame what is a secure implementation of MPC and what are the properties you can use and how you can use it, right? Because at the end of the day, today we're in a situation where there's increased scrutiny from the regulator to actually have more insight about the cybersecurity measures within, for instance, qualified custodian. And if we don't bring clarity on MPC, I think it will throw back, the technology. It will be hurtful for the technology itself, because the regulator is not going to go on the gray zone, right? They want white or black. Yeah. So how can I read that someone has implemented MPC in the right way? HSM are very easy to read. You have the FIB standards and you know what you have. MPC is not there yet, and I think, and we have a lot of, working with Coinbase, we're working with Binance, we're working with Blockdaemon to start publishing those new implementation and those industry standards, and this is critical if you want to make sure that MPC is used in a broader way.
And, I am not a huge fan of the US three-letter agency, as they're confused in a turf war over who can regulate crypto. But I'm delighted that the National Institute of Standards and Technology is the four-letter agency. They're all geeks, right? They're like engineers and geeks and scientists, and they're totally overboard in terms of the precision. And that is fantastic that we get to engage with people who are in a regulatory function in such a productive way. And hopefully the collaboration you guys are doing with NIST can rub off to the other three-letter agency and some four letters one I will not mention on the softer humanity side of rulemaking. But I think it's great. I mean, I'm pro-government when done well.
Fair enough.
So I don't know how you feel about the regulatory structure, but it would be very, very good to also get some guidance on what does it mean to be custodian, right? Like, right now we're saying key shots and stuff like that. Is validators responsible for the actions? Are key shot signer responsible for the action? Does it require positive control? These are all really questions that I think people are asking, but nobody's answering really. So not the agencies, I would say.
No, you're right. It's very fascinating because the financial regulator don't have the manpower internally to be able to rule on these things, right? It's already a complex technology, and it's just that they don't have the skills, right, to be able to have a strong educated opinion. So instead of that, they pretty much, and it's not a global view, because in Japan, in Korea, you have different view. But when you look at where MiCA is heading and what the proposal that has been released by the SEC 8 weeks ago or 9 weeks ago on qualified custody. What's interesting, and I think what goes in the right sense, because when you don't have the legitimacy to properly understand the technology, then it was the right thing to do. They talk about a qualified custodian is, however, the one who owns the private key or have control over the private key. And for MPC, it's very important that you have that subtlety, right? That you have the difference between actually not just owning the private key fully on premise,
right,
but making sure that as long as you have the control from a technological standpoint, you
right.
are the qualified custodian. And in honesty, it's only fair because we could always imagine that someone put a backdoor in an HSM. How would you find that, right? So
Right,
as
right,
long
right.
as you don't express this notion of control and this notion of, the liability is exposed to the one that has the contractual liability and the technical control, I think that's, those are the beginning of this guidance. They go in the right direction. Now they should be, they will be fine-tuned and they need to fine-tune as we are advancing, but at least they don't rule out certain technology from the
Absolutely.
get-go, which is
And it's
good.
also really interesting for the moment when they realize that with a sufficiently sharded peer-to-peer network, positive control is in a group of people who don't know each other. What does that even mean, right? So, there's a simplicity of saying, oh, someone must have the private key, saying, well, the cryptography go a little further than that. You can have no positive control, but have ownership of a private key, I should say. How does that work? And you could have temporal control. Imagine you do iterate the key every minute. What does that really mean?
Yeah.
For any individual kind of custodian operating on Web2 authentication or whatever it might be. So plenty to talk about with the regulator. And so I am bullish on the technology development moving forward, and hopefully the substance and the realness and the use cases that can be shown provides more guidance. I think there's just not enough good use cases for us to have good conversation. So hopefully as the use cases develop, as the infrastructure improves to enable those use cases, the conversations with the regulator, which really serves an important purpose of protecting regular people from people who doing the wrong thing, the people in power abusing their power. So I think regulator has a role. We just want to make sure there's a way for them to get it. And sometimes the easier ways to get something is to use it. The same way people really didn't understand anything about AI, but then they use ChatGPT and suddenly they have a sense of what's going on. So I think it's really important we get these tools, whether it's from your tools or your partner's tools, into people's hands so they can have a better understanding of how MPC works.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
And I would say, ideally, right, and I think that's the ideal situation, at least on our side, within the next 5 to 10 years, is that once you start operating the tool, you actually don't worry anymore about what's happening behind, but you're guaranteeing that ownership and that control while you're using it. And so once again, the complexity of managing private keys, I feel like, when you look at some use cases, to me today, the use cases that makes the most sense, and you'll see a lot on the payment side, on the remittance side, is when actually you onboard the user without telling him at all that is managing, that the technology is on blockchain or that is managing private key, right? And I think this is where we really we're still very caught up in our technology because our industry is very new. But in 5 to 10 years from that, as the technology will be in the hands of people, I think a lot of the complexity that we're trying to almost, very thinly detailed will be going away.
Yeah, and I think how people would use automation on using smart contract or even using AI, or how people will use the phone as a proxy of the identity, those things will converge with all the Web3 stuff and emerge a new model. It's not just like Web3 is just like Web2. It's like Web3 is inclusive of Web2, all the authentication method that you know and love, plus what's available in mobile with passkey, plus what's available in account abstraction with automation, plus what's available in AI agent. That's most likely where we're going. But that each one of those things is an episode of Web3 Watch, and I've recorded an episode on them. But that's where it's going, and it's really exciting to see those things come together. And obviously, there's no big synthesis of big ideas until we work through the small ideas and the big idea until itself to create some concrete things. And I think what you illuminate to us is a really clear vision of where MPC is today, where it needs to be in tomorrow. The collaboration is necessary. The peer-to-peer nature, that is something we should work towards on every piece. Otherwise, we just gradually re-centralize the whole thing. What's the point, right?
I agree. Or I couldn't agree more even.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time to walk us through a pretty wide range of stuff. Hopefully we cover most of the topic related to a kind of introduction to most people to multi-party computation and how it affects the world of blockchain as it involved. I'm incredibly impressed that you were able to use the flexibility MPC to support many, many different networks. I think the idea that one network or one type of protocol, one type of signature scheme, Bitcoin versus Tesos versus Ethereum EVMs compatible is the fiefdom is not helpful for anybody. It's better to say, hey, these are all just same primitives and there's a common scheme underneath it. It's mathematics. Absolutely. And MPC is a expression of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first it was from the beginning, interoperability was a core USP. And so today we support 25 blockchain, but we can integrate under 5 weeks a new blockchain. And we'll be also one of the first actually MPC provider to support stack curve natively. Mm-hmm. And this is because we actually have an owner MPC stack. So yeah, this is for us incredibly important. And we know that we have builders that made choices today for their application that they would want to evolve in the next 2-3 years just because the technology is evolving, and so you don't want to lock them up right in a certain technology, but on the contrary, giving them open up the infra, so you give them the possibility to adjust based on the new innovation.
That makes a lot of sense. And at the end of the day, these are still Lego bricks that we're using. The better the bricks, the better the thing, but still someone have to put together. And the one thing I've always said about Lego is I've bought some knockoff Legos and they're not as good. Really, really good composable infrastructure fit together well. And I feel like, it needs a certain precision, a certain understanding, a certain level of care. It's not just about putting a bunch of stuff together, and it seems like you guys are taking that level of craftsmanship and precision to the work, and that will show. Even though it may not be on the surface obvious, but by talking to you, I sense the thoughtfulness that went into the design and the thinking about how to bring this to market.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yes, we were really also obsessed with that, with composability and making sure that we enable our users, or the developers that are building on top of us, to integrate with an ecosystem that is difficult to apprehend, but where today you have already quite a bit of solution that enable you to put together a piece that is safe and that will enable your users to quickly go around your application, and mostly will remove the friction, right, of managing your users.
Absolutely. Well, so if people, either developers or users or interested parties within the Web3 space, want to learn more about Dfns, what's the means to do that?
You can go on our website, dfns.co.co, obviously on all social networks, Twitter, LinkedIn, or you can DM me or send me an email at clarisse@dfns.co.
Sounds good. Well, it's really interesting to go through what we went through today, and I'm excited about the industry collaboration. I'm certainly aware of many different open source libraries and MPCs, and to know that there is a working group going towards to standardize that with the help of NIST in part of the thing really bodes well to bring a primitive that is kind of transcends the current token NFT marketplace, but really thinking about decentralized ownership in a way that allows us to apply to other technologies. So thank you very much, Clarisse, for your time today. And as always, we thank the community for your time and attention as we bring builders who are on the forefront and share the experience, share the insight, and more importantly, share the passion about bringing the decentralized future, practically accelerate the timeline, providing that ownership that is grounded on humanity, grounded on what people do, good and bad, and trying to make that humanity that has built so much in this world to build more in a shared and equitable way. So thank you very much for your time. Until next time, Clarisse.